Eric Stecker. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Eric?
Good,
So
man. Long
easy to
time no
remember.
see. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that was and I wanted to talk about this in the podcast. How you were one of those folks that was the kind of person that was on my radar because you were so hot and heavy when you were coming up, but you were really getting hot right as I was going through a lot of turmoil at Burger, and so we didn't connect like I've connected. You're like a John Wooden kind, and those people like you are. Passionate and dedicated to this kind of thing, and those are usually people who would be somebody that I would have in my circles and connect with a lot, and you would be one of those guys, and we were in the same places many times, but you're a really busy guy, I'm a busy guy. I was going through some drama, so we didn't really connect, but you've always been one of those guys that's been on my radar as you're one of the John Wooden types that's got the range in the backyard, right? Because you
Yep.
just walk right out the door, you got the range right there, you got the machine shop, and you got like the dream, right?
Yeah.
All the great puzzles and pieces.
The dream, sometimes
Yeah,
nightmares, but whatever. It's all about perspective, right?
sure,
Um,
sure.
well, I have this weird. I don't know if it's weird, unusual. Let's call it unusual thoughts in my head that if, for example, if you and I go to the same gunsmith, you and I use the same barrel maker, you and I use everything the same. It's random if I beat you. Like skill obviously comes into play, but I don't want to beat you on skill. If I gotta beat you on skill, I didn't do my homework. Is the way I think about things, right? So
Hmm.
I'm always looking to show up with a better rifle than you, so that I require less of my skill to win. I believe that I'm not extremely skilled, which is precisely why I'm always looking for an advantage somewhere else,
Hmm.
and the funny part is I always felt this way coming up, as you call it.
Hmm.
And then I started connecting with people like Speedy. And when
Hmm.
started talking to Speedy, I asked him why he became a gunsmith. And he says, because I wanted to have a better rifle than everybody else. And I'm like, that's precisely how I feel. And anyway, so we made that connection. And of course, he took me under his wing. He taught me gunsmithing and things of that nature, which we'll come around to that. But Mr. McMillan himself is the one that kind of mentored Speedy when Speedy got
Hmm.
going. But
I didn't know that. I didn't know
yeah,
that. That's
yeah.
interesting. Hmm.
And so Speedy had the same thing, same thoughts. He says, "No, I want to show up with a better rifle than everybody else."
Yep.
And Speedy to this day claims that's how he got into the Hall of Fame, by having better rifles. He says the skill. Imagine beating a Tony Boyer. He said that was no small feat. So Speedy says, I didn't not only got into the Hall of Fame, which in itself, you're a bencher shooter,
Mhm. Oh
is an
yeah,
extreme feat
it
accomplishment.
really is.
He,
Yeah,
he said, I got in it when Tony Boyer was hot and heavy. He goes,
yeah,
that was the toughest time to get into the Hall of Fame. He was guarding the gates of the Hall of Fame.
yep.
But um, so anyway, that's kind of why I always tinkered with different things, tuners being one of them. And, I'll play around with all kinds of stuff, man. And, I would always
Mhm.
corner you when you were Burger and ask you about all these bullets. And anyway,
Yeah. Well, to me, it's to me, you're applying. It's perspective. You're right. You're applying your skill, but it's like in race car driving where the best mechanics and engineer types can do better because they're figuring out how to set their cars up for the track. And so if you're focusing on making sure you bring the best car to the range or the best gun to the range, your your skills started, before you left your garage. They started back then, and so you're applying your skill to the effort then, and then it's just a matter of when you get on the range, you're prepared, and so now you're executing the actual range. But that your skill was what prepared you up to that moment, and shooters who are extremely good. Now, Tony Boyer is an exception. I mean, that guy, you talk about gatekeeper. He had, last time I saw, he had 143 Hall of Fame points. You only need 10.
yeah.
So that's 13 guys that he shut out of the Hall of Fame. And that was then. That was shoot, that was probably 10 years ago. So, and I know he's not active anyway, but anyway, the idea of being a top capable shooter might make you a little lax on your preparation. And that's where, the skill part, it's the whole thing. And I think, frankly, I think folks that are into F class and into bench rest, they have something in them where the competitive nature is at a not higher level like better, but higher and more intense, more passionate. And it's like you're not satisfied with half minute. I mean, F class, it's all relative. F class at 1,000 yards, half minute, let's go. But bench rest, half minute, a little different story. But the notion that it's like there's another level, there's another level, there's another level, and how do I get there?
Which actually the same story in a way, because I've often said, and I'll say it again, if I have a rifle, F-class rifle that shoots half MOA at 100 yards, that barrel's coming off.
Yeah.
Because if it does half MOA at 100 yards at 1,000, it's a disaster,
Right. Yeah.
And, most people want half MOA rifles, which half MOA rifles are a really good rifle.
Oh, yeah.
But not for what we do.
No. Well, it's all relative, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's all relative. Yeah.
Exactly. So
you get a hunter with a half-minute rifle, they'll kill anything they see. You get a bench shooter with a half-minute rifle, they'll throw it in the trash can.
Exactly. It's amazing. So yeah. Eric Stecker, let's just a quick 10-second, 15-second overview. You
Sure.
Burger. You started with Burger.
I did. Mm-hmm.
Then you went to Macmillan.
Yes.
And now
Yes.
you're with Macmillan and Defiance.
Defiance. Yeah. I joined Macmillan, and the Macmillan was purchased by Bob Beck, who he's got a group called the Extreme Group. And so he's another passionate guy. You have a tendency to hang out with those kinds of folks. Another passionate guy, has big visions, and he wanted to do more. And so we ended up getting Defiance. And so we're involved in grander designs, grander plans. But right now, my focus is mostly Macmillan and Defiance.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to talk about all that. Obviously,
Cool.
I want to talk about Burger.
Cool.
Because that's where I met you. That's where, Burger was it was some guy making bullets in his garage. And then next thing I know, Burger is what it is now. And you were a massive part of making that happen.
Yeah. Right.
So I don't know if anybody knows this, but Eric Stecker was the guy at least in my eyes, that took Burger from Walt's garage to, what it is now. Everybody knows Burger bullets are the bullet. If you're going to shoot precision, that's the bullet. So how did all that start?
Well, so the start of it is Walt Burger. I appreciate your thoughts, and I was involved, but there were many people that were along the way, and most importantly, of course, is Walt Burger. He started making bullets back in the 50s. Now, he was a varmint hunter. He was a hunter. He was an outdoor enthusiast. He would tell us stories about how they used to take their rifles to school and leave them in the principal's office because they'd hunt squirrels on the way back home. So, and that was Walt's life. So he was just an outdoor guy. So he was a varmint shooter, which dovetailed into bench rest. Well, once he got into bench rest, he was hooked. And so he started making his own bullets because he just simply believed that he could do better. He wanted better. He believed he could do better. And he actually, I think it's still around somewhere, he went in with a few guys to get a small jeweler's lathe so that they could actually turn jackets down to that 3/10. That I don't know why. I don't know where that number came from. I know the origins of the jacket, the number on the jackets, but for some reason 3/10 was the target. And so they would take a jeweler's lathe and individually turn the insides of all of the jackets he would make into bullets. So as a machinist, you can understand what that means in terms of literally taking a single jacket for a single bullet, sticking it into a collet, turning it out, pulling it, you know what I mean? So he did this thousands of times. So he started doing really well. And their business plan, it was sort of funny. Their business plan was that they were going to show how well these bullets shot, but they didn't want to do it for everybody else. So what they were going to do is they were going to rent out the machine and they were going to rent out time. That was their big business plan. It was so funny. So they were doing that. And he started being really successful. And so, of course, people were like, hey, what are you doing? Oh, I'm making my own bullets. Well, so within the timeline, that's when the J4 jackets came out. And so Walt sort of said disgustingly, so that ruined my lathe plan, my lathe renting plan, because now all these jackets were already 3/10, so we didn't need to turn them anymore. So that lathe ended up in a shelf somewhere and collecting dust. But yeah, so he was making bullets for himself, and he would make his own bullets, and then he would make a few extra that he'd throw in the trunk of the car, and he'd take them and he'd just sell them to the shooters at the ranges. Well, that basically was how it went up until his first wife passed, and he married his second wife, Eunice. That was in the late 80s. Well, Eunice, so when Eunice shows up at his house, and they're getting ready to start their lives together, she walks into a spare bedroom, and Walt's, it looks like, you can imagine any reloader's room. It's got RCBS presses and stuff everywhere, and it's just Walt making bullets. And she notices that there's this pile of paper in the corners, and she's like, well, what's this? And so it's like torn targets and loose leaf papers and all this kind of stuff. He's like, well, people will, they'll tell me they want bullets, and so they'll write these notes down, and those are all the people that want bullets. And she's like, so these are customers? This is like demand? Well, Eunice had a business background. She was in the hotel and industry and such, and so she was exposed to business kinds of notions. And so she's like, this is crazy. This is a business. You should really start doing this for other people. And it was actually Eunice that talked him into making the shed out in the backyard, where then they moved everything from the bedroom out into the shed, out to the shop. And that's when I got involved. Now, so they were wanting to turn it into a business, but the thing that Walt's a Depression era guy. And so the thing that he was adamant about is he made bullets only for himself, and for people who had already ordered. So he would never make inventory. He would only make what was on back order. And so, fast forward a little bit, and I get involved in 1990. And so I'm just getting exposed to this, and I hadn't been a shooter up to that point. And so I'm just getting exposed to this. And I don't know, I think I'm a weird guy. My brain works in weird ways. And so I like to look at things. I like to think about things. I like to break things down and figure out causes and all sort of nonsense. Well, the thing that I was noticing, because I was the one that was in the shop all day long, I was the one answering phones, I was the one taking orders, was how many people would call and say, hey, do you have any? Do you have any 52 grains? Do you have any 68 grains? No, we don't. Ah, crap. Because they were needing them right now. And sometimes they'd place a back order, and many times they wouldn't. And so the role that I played that really transformed the trajectory of where Burger went was I would talk to Walt about that. I'm like, well, why don't we make more? No, absolutely not. He was absolutely against it, forbid it. Well, back then, Walt and Eunice traveled to matches all the time, and they would go to matches like the Nationals. Well, the NBRSA Nationals is a 6-day match. Well, if that Nationals was in Ohio, Walt drove everywhere because he had to take all his gear because, of course, bench rest shooters take a reloading room to the range. So that meant like 2-3 day drive. So interestingly enough, 2-3 day drive to get there, 6 days worth of shooting, and about a half a day drive back. I don't know how that man got back so fast, but he would catch me more times, cleaning up or whatever, preparing for his return because he would drive back so fast. But anyway, I had a window. And so I made an executive decision, because at that point I was the plant manager of a shed size operation. I made an executive decision that we were going to go ahead and run. I don't remember if it was like 20,000 or 30,000. It was some amount of 22 grain 52s, because that seemed to be what everybody wanted. And so I'm like, all right, we're just going to make them. And at the time, this little shop had those little bookshelves that have those little L brackets that hold them up. And that was the entire inventory, because when we would make bullets for Walt and for the people who had them on order, to make enough, you always had to make a little bit more. You know what I mean? So if you needed 15,000, you'd make 17 because you scrap some and whatever. So you make a few more. Well, so we always ended up with maybe 300 or 800 bullets at the end of a run, and those would end up on this little bookshelf.
Overruns.
And so Yeah, but it was, maybe at the most maybe 1,000, and
Right.
and at that point there was probably 8 or 10 different choices. So it wasn't a lot of stuff. So you see these little sparse boxes everywhere. Well, so we start making these 52s, and we start putting them on the shelf because I've already filled all the orders. So now we're putting them on the shelf. Well, so the shelf starts filling up, and I'm like, oh, I didn't really calculate this out. Well, by the time all the bullets were made, there was way too many to put on those flimsy little bookshelves.
Yeah.
So we ended up stacking them on the table, on the bench. He had these custom steel reinforced benches for the presses and stuff. So we put them on these benches, and it filled. I mean, it looked like so many freaking bullets. It wasn't that many in the grand scheme of things now. It wasn't that many. But in that moment, it looked like the Fort Knox of bullets. And I was terrified because I'm like, oh, my God. He's going to come back and all these bullets are going to be here. I didn't expect it to look like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And my hope was that I would be able to sell enough off by the time he got back that it would be, everything would be okay. I would be able to explain it. That's not what happened. Of course, he comes back at light speed. He comes back and he walks in the door and he sees them. And man, those who know Walt know that he was a hot, cold guy. There were times where he was the greatest guy to be around because he was so much fun. There were times when he was not cool to be around, and he was a very intense, fiery. He got a lot of fights. He was a violent, physical man. He didn't beat the shit out of me, but he was a put your hands on a guy kind of guy. So he was a very interesting guy to be around at times. And this depression-era guy walks in and sees all this money sitting on his counter, and he loses it. He absolutely loses it. I'm surprised I didn't get fired. He was so pissed. I think he kept me on because he wanted me to see it like fail.
He wanted you to see how big of a mistake you made.
Yeah. I'm not sure why he kept me on. He was pissed. He was high level pissed. But anyway, so he said, we're not going to sell these bullets will take a year to sell or something like that. Some exaggerated. He was just so upset. I think it was under normal circumstances, that amount of bullets probably would have sold in like 3 months or something like that. They were gone in a week. Wow. They were gone by the time he was done. And it was having that experience, because now there's more money in the bank account than he's probably seen it. You know what I mean? All these things happen that he wasn't used to seeing. And he's like, and it sort of got his attention. He's like, oh, okay, so what other ideas have you got? And so then he starts sort of, I mean, he knew I was a hard worker, but he starts taking me a little more seriously regarding like marketing. And I'm just a guy who figures shit out. My training, to say I had training is not accurate, because I did not do well in education. So I just figure stuff out. And so I just listened to people, and people wanted stuff. And so I'm like, well, here's what people are telling me. Here's what I think will work based on what I'm hearing. And so, we just started doing that. And then, it didn't take very long, because once we started making them ahead, then people were buying them, out the door, because now we were selling them because we had inventory. Once that started happening, well, now we needed more people. So we started hiring more people. They built on an extension. So Walt the shed was at the end of a 2-car carport. And so Walt closed in one of those carports to make an extension. So it became like an L. And so that's when we started doing 30 calibers and some of the bigger bullets. And so that was like the big bullet section, and, the smaller bullets were done in the other section. And it was funny because every day the UPS driver would show up, and we had this little red wagon, because that's what they would use to pull out to the cart. Well, that red wagon started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it didn't really occur to me until we were served notice that, so we had 2 shifts of, at that point, it was probably 6 or 8 people per shift in Walt's residence. Walt's residence, he was a Depression-era guy. He didn't believe in living lavishly. He lived in a spec home. It's a regular 1,600 square foot spec home. So you can imagine the front of his house there was a lot of cars. And so one of the neighbors ratted us out. There's cars out front all day long. I can't, they didn't like the cars out front. So the city actually, what they did was they checked the UPS logs. And they're like, you guys are running a full blown business here. This isn't some little hobby. And they're like, you got to move right now, or we're going to shut you down. And then that's when we moved into the first like sort of industrial strip mall kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
We got like 1,800 square feet of industrial space in a place right up the road. And then that's sort of where, then we just kept going. Then it really sort of exploded because now we've got a shop. Then it went from, I don't know, 16 people to like 30 people. We ended up having to get another one because we had to start storing more jackets because we were going through them faster. And so my role in Burger growing was simply that I saw something that was there, and I just happened to be the guy in the position to say something about it. And I was fortunate enough that I was right in one area, that it opened Walt's eyes to an opportunity that he didn't exactly see. And I wasn't really even going for it, because that's the thing about guys like us. I mean, it's not about money. It's not about money. It's about passion. So he wasn't even looking for the big payoff. He just wanted to make good bullets. It was Eunice that said, well, why don't you turn this into something? You never know where that can go. And so she wasn't even really trying to shoot it to the stars. She was just saying, well, you love doing this. It's fun. Let's see where this can go. And the notion of that passion and being excited about what you do, it's not about money. And so Walt didn't see it. And I wasn't, to say I was interested in money. I want to eat. I want to take care of my family. I was a teenage kid that, I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth. So I just roughed it. So yeah, we wanted money to be able to do our thing, but I wasn't like seeking wealth. That wasn't the point. And so it just, all these things just sort of happened to come together at a very good time when these passionate people sort of got excited to do something, and then it sort of just went from there. And the reason why it's as big as it is now today is because, fortunately, when you talk about businesses changing hands and policies changing, fortunately, not a single owner had gone back on that 3/10 requirement. And that's a big deal, because not a big deal because of its effect. It's a big deal because it's hard to do.
I've seen the machine easily in person. The J4. People don't know where the name came from. It's the machine number.
No, actually, that's not true.
What is it? That's what I was told at the burger factory.
Yeah, they don't know. They don't know shit.
All right, tell me the real reason.
That's not true. So the person who started J4 Jackets was a guy named James, or JL as he was called. So his son told me where J4 came from, and his son was one of the owners of Burger. He was actually the one that bought it from Walt. So J4 came from, it was the initial of the 4 guys that figured out how to make them. Because there was a guy named John, Jack, Jim, and Jerry, or whatever. And I don't, I know there was a John and a Jim, and James and John. And there was a guy, John, who even worked there when I was there at one point, or was with part of the company that had changed hands a few times. And so J4 is the first 4 initials of the 4 people that figured out how to make a 3/10 jacket. That's what it is. It wasn't the number of the machine. It was the 4 guys that figured out how to make the J4
makes more sense.
Jacket. Yeah.
I saw the machine. It says J4 on it because there's J1, J2, J3, J4, J5, and anyway, it makes sense.
That's what they call them now, just to designate them. But no, it was. I get it. Yeah, it's probably why the story exists, because somebody rationalized. Oh, that must be why it is. No, but the son of the guy who made the J4 jackets told me that they picked J4 because the 4 guys that did it were named. Their first name started with a J. Is that why it was called J4. Yeah, that's why. So
to this day, how long ago was that?
The J4 thing, or the
50 years ago?
So Walt started making bullets in the 50s, and so he started turning jackets. So it was, they would have done it in the late 50s, early 60s was when J4 came about.
That's crazy. Because to this day, there is no better jacket.
Yeah, well, and that's
this day.
To me, that's really the crazy thing. Now, there's to you and I, there's all kinds of layers to this. And I don't want to take up too much time, but it's crazy to me that Burger has improved the quality of the other bullet products. There's no question about it. The pressure of competing against Berger has made the other products better. And I can say that based on dimensional measurements. I'm not even talking about shooting on target, because I've never used the other brand's bullets. A couple exceptions, but rarely have ever used the brand's bullets. So everything that I base my perspective on is from measuring their bullets. Now, I've measured a bunch of their bullets because we want to see where we fit. And I've received reports, but it comes down to the fact that they're improving their products. But for whatever reason, that still confuses me. They won't commit. There's two things. They won't commit to the 3/10. At least that's my opinion. I'm not in their rooms, meeting rooms, so I don't know what they say to each other. But my guess is they don't commit to 3/10. And probably the most critical thing that so many of them ignore, and this includes Lapua, is they don't adhere to the strictest control over the cleanliness of the core and the jacket before they're inserted together. Because if there's anything, and I don't care, they say, oh, it's so thin, it doesn't matter. We're talking tense, right? You put that core, if it's got any lube at all, even trace lube, into a jacket that has any lube at all, even trace lube, and you seat them together, you know how this works. You don't get a perfectly pristine cylinder. It like tie dyes. It like tie dyes. It goes. It's like fluid. It goes wherever it wants to go. Well, everywhere it goes is going to be thicker and thinner, and the balance around the axis that's dispersion. I mean, your balance around the axis gives you dispersion.
You're talking about when you get down to the 10. When we say tenths, we mean 10,000ths of an inch.
10,000ths, yeah.
Yeah. So we call them tenths, but we mean 10,000ths of an inch.
Yes.
We were making some parts in the shop, and the tolerance was 2 10,000ths. Okay. And we have a CMM, and we're measuring with the CMM these parts, and everything was checking out, one after the other. And we're measuring one, and it just has kind of like you're talking about, because the CMM that I have, it sweeps the whole part. It doesn't just take Miranda, it just sweeps the whole part. It takes like 500 different measurements. And it just had like an erratic, in one side, it was erratic, and it wasn't throwing off the measurement, but it was erratic. And it's like, how is that not perfectly round? And we kept scratching our heads. And one of my machinists finally said, hang on. And he took the towel and just wiped that part and measured again. It was the oil from his fingers where he set it down, that it was enough, when you're measuring down to the micron, right?
Yeah.
But so I've seen it affect, if a CMM can measure it, and of course we kept doing it, and I guess the CMM it's getting on the tip, and the point is, it was an eye-opening experience. So I can 100% believe that it would affect the bullet.
Well, yeah, because the thing that I try to help people understand is, the best analogy is like an out of balance tire, because that column of lead, when it's spinning at 250,000 RPM generally, whatever amount of material there is away from the axis, as long as that's balanced, then it flies as much down a straight path as is reasonable, right? There are all kinds of little things that occur, but for the most part, dispersion is minimized. Well, if you've got a jacket that's really thick on one side, or has oils or lubricants that are thick on one side, and it's thin on the other side, well, the outer diameter is round because of the barrel. So even if the cylinder is perfectly round and the jacket has, I'm over exaggerating for a reason, because when you talk to people about things like tenths, they don't seem to understand it. So I'm over exaggerating for a reason. So if you have this big bulge of copper sticking out of your bullet, but then it goes into the barrel, and so now the barrel makes it perfectly round in a cylinder. Well, the area where there's that big bulge is going to push that lead closer to the axis. Well, the area where there's that thin area of jacket or less lube is going to move the lead further away from the axis. So now you've got a cylinder of lead that's very dense and very heavy. That one side of it is thinner than the other side. Well, that heavy side is going to drag that trajectory like a corkscrew. And so you're going to get dispersion is going to be increased because that heavier side is pulling that bullet in a direction. And the reason why that dispersion shows up on the target is because there's no way for a shooter to orient that thick side on the right position. Because I mean, frankly, it's actually a truth that if you were to have a much thicker side and a much thinner side, but you put them in exactly the same spot every time when you chambered your round, because of the fixed nature of the rifling, the corkscrewing would make them precise, right? Because the nature of the trajectory would put them in the same spot as they reach that distance in the target, right? But you can't do that. There's no way to know positionally where the thick spot or the thin spot is. And so that's why you get dispersion, because that heavier spot that pulls it in a particular spiral, by the time it hits the target, well, sometimes it's over here and sometimes it's over here and sometimes. So that's where dispersion can come from. Is that
I think
area.
I think it comes, and I agree with all of that. But to your point as to you don't understand why the other companies don't focus on this so much.
Yeah.
Because Walt was making. I think the reason is Walt was making benches bullets.
Well,
the others are making hunting bullets, right? So this dispersion that you just described, it's very little. I mean, it's very little for most people's measures, right?
Right.
But for a bench shooter,
yeah, for us, that's.
If you see paper between two bullets, you're like, oh, I'm done.
You're done.
I went to a benches match one time so far. Jeff Pinehart talked me into it. We did a podcast, and during the podcast, he talked me into it. I said, I'm doing it. And of course, once I said I'm doing it, I did it. I went to the hog roast, and he said, just show up. You can shoot my rifles, all my gear. He gave me, I'm sure it wasn't his best rifle, but his second or third best rifles are hammers.
Sure.
This rifle was an absolute hammer. And the point is, I was shooting, and of course, you know, the flags are all green, right? And one turns orange, and I'm like, it's 100 yards. It ain't gonna make a difference. I shot anyway. My goodness, all of a sudden I got snake eyes on the target, and I'm like, oh boy. So what do I do as an F-class shooter? I said, okay, now those are my outer bounds. Throw the rest between those two, like cut away the paper. Don't make them any wider. You know, don't make it any worse. So then it became an F-class match at that point, putting the other three between those two. Yeah. But my goodness, it doesn't take much. So when you talk about dispersion, I mean, benches guys are trying to shoot into zeros, meaning you want all 5 bullets to look like there's one. Yeah. And it was, and I think that's the difference. If I had to guess, is Walt was making benches bullets. Everybody else was making hunting bullets, you know? And there's a big difference. Because just like we discussed earlier, a hunter, if they get a half MOA gun, they're ecstatic.
But you good as you can get.
You give a bencher's guy a half MOA gun, they don't stand a chance. Yeah. You know, and I think that's because there's other companies copying Burger's design now. And I don't think it matters as long as they don't have everything else. If they don't have the jackets, if they don't have everything else, it's not going to matter. So, whatever.
Yeah, where it will matter is, so this is one of the reasons why I've started doing some podcasts here lately, is where it will matter is in the narrative. Because I tell people, I'll start conversations by saying I'm a bench rest shooter, because to me, what that does is that sort of sets a frame of reference around the notion that, okay, I care about things at a level that's probably abnormal, but it's at a very, very high level. So I'm a bench rest guy. To me is a label that means that I take extra care. But most people, when they hear that, they just think, oh, you're nuts. You know, you're they don't really know that it means extreme precision. Well, then, so my point in what I was saying earlier was the fact that, so these other brands will market things like their bench rest, you know, extreme precision and all this kind of stuff. And the message, it sounds like it's speaking to the level of quality that we would consider premium, but they're talking about a level of quality that's far below that. And so to get to my point, the reason why I'm out here is because I'm trying to help people with the understanding of there are differences. There really are. And there are reasons why people go for, that quarter minute angle. And so one of the things that I found out that was very interesting when I came to McMillan was the fact that, bench rest as a group, the numbers are shrinking, competitive bench rest. I think the super shoot recently had 100 some shooters. It was, where the super shoot used to be 400, 300, 400 shooters. So the group is actually shrinking in size. But the thing that I found interesting when I came to McMillan was McMillan sells a very significant, far more than I imagined, of flat end bench rest stocks, the 3-inch flat end 4-inch stocks, which are only good for shooting groups. They're horrible for taking out to the field. And I was sort of surprised by that. And the thing that I've come to understand is there are a lot of people out there that are interested in shooting precisely. They want to do it as a recreation. Now, they don't necessarily want to go shoulder to shoulder with Speedy and, all the top guys now. I'm not sure who they are now. I'm sort of out of the game these days, but they don't want to go shoulder to shoulder on range day and spend 2 days, competing and embarrassing themselves, because that's usually what happens at a bench rest match. But they just like shooting tight groups. And you nailed it. Bench rest shooters aren't looking for quarter minute. They're looking for one hole, period. They want one hole. Every bullet they want to shoot it to be in the same hole. Well, to get there, now that I think recently they just broke another record. So there was a record that actually McMillan set, not Gail McMillan, the founder, but Pat McMillan, his brother, set the first perfect zero record that they actually called a .009. No. The first one was a 9.
Oh,
so the very first one was a 9. And so the reason why it was a 9 was because the error limit on the measuring was 9 thousandths. So if you shot a target and you took it to the scorer and you said, hey, this is a wrong group measure, if that measurement was within 9 thousandths, the score stayed. So if they say you shot a 250 and they measured it a bunch of times and it ended up being a 243, so it was 7 thousandths under, you didn't get that 7 thousandths because it was within the 9 thousandths error window. So it stayed at 250. So because of that 9 thousandths error window, the group was unmeasurable. It sat inside a 243 aperture. They called it a .009 because they thought he cheated. So there was a big rumor,
controversy.
Yeah. It was a big deal back then. But that record stayed. So the 007 that you're aware of was the most recent. So that record was broken, I don't know, I think in the 60s. It was long. That was an old record. It was recent. I think maybe within the last 5 years, 6 years, that somebody shot another one. Mm-hmm. And so since it was like 40 years, 50 years until the next perfect zero group that sits inside a 243 aperture was shot. And so now, and it was in the same class at the same yardage. So now what do? So what they did was they made it a .007 because then it bumped that old controversial record. It bumped it because it was unmeasurable. It was a zero group. It sat inside the aperture. You couldn't measure it. So they called it a .007 so that it bumped the older record out. But there's only 2 of those that have ever been shot. And think about that. In all bench rest competitions since the 50s or whenever they started, only 2 times in recorded bench rest matches has there ever been a group where all 5 bullets were within the aperture. So that's how infrequently that happens. But that's the precision they're going for. And so it's not quarter minute. A lot of people think bench resters are going for quarter minute. No, quarter minute's where they end up because that's probably, eighth minute, you got some ags, 100-yard ags that can get near eighth minute. But quarter minute is, over a course of two yardages and the 2 guns, a quarter minute ag will get you I think it was 5th place at the super shoot 20 years ago.
Yeah, you got to be in the ones now to stand a chance. You got to be flat
at 100
twos
yards.
flat twos. No, it's getting crazy.
Yeah.
So, my website is shootsmallgroups.com because that's precisely my passion, right? I want to shoot small groups, and our slogan is we manufacture small groups.
Yeah.
We don't make anything that we don't think is going to help you shoot smaller. That's my passion. That's my mission. That's what we do. People say, "Hey, you should make so and so." No, it others can make that. It's not going to help you shoot smaller groups. Mm-hmm. We focus on precisely that because we know that's what it is. Now you talk about McMillan. Now you were McMillan. You were with Burger that was started by a bench rest shooter. Now you're McMillan. That was also started by a bench rest shooter. Yeah. So let's fast forward to now. Sure. You're with McMillan. I met Kelly. He actually had a podcast. I was on his podcast. Mm-hmm. Great person. Of course, rest in peace, Kelly. Yeah. When did you come to work for McMillan?
Well, so while I was with Burger, when I talked earlier about how, you and I talked several times, but we didn't connect in a way that I have connected with other people. Well, what I mean by that is, connected with Kelly. I went to shows with Kelly. I was in his booth. I worked with Kyle Brown of Night Force because he was the same kind of mindset. It was people who were like us, who were attracted to extreme precision, that really think about things differently. I have a tendency to gravitate towards, and Kelly was one of those guys. And so as we did the things that we did, you bump into each other a lot. And when you think the same, you start having conversations, and they lead into things like, well, hey, why don't you come down to there's a show in Texas, that big one, the hunting SCI, I think it is. So why don't you come down to the SCI show with me in my booth, and we can talk about precision, and we could talk about premium quality stuff together. And so I did that. So I spent a lot of time with Kelly, just working together. Now, and I wasn't necessarily promoting McMillan Stocks back then, but I was promoting the idea of precision, and McMillan Stocks was all about that. So it just was a shared collective message. And so then that was my exposure to Kelly initially. And so we had the kind of relationships you'll have in these industries where you'll interact with somebody 3 or 4 times, and they're very special, significant interactions, but then you don't see them for, many months because the next event or whatever. And so that's sort of how Kelly and I's relationship was then. But then fast forward a little bit, then there was what I went through at Burger. Let's just say it was difficult. It was unfortunate. I wish it would have gone differently, but it was what it was. So ultimately, I made the decision that there wasn't a path forward for me at Burger, or at what is now Capstone. Burger's Burger, but they have the whole Capstone thing. So I left, and so fortunately, the series was such that I was able to get into Burger. There's a whole thing where Walt sold to the guy who was the son of the J4 guy. That guy went bankrupt. He sold to another family. I ended up with that family. But when I came back to that family, Burger had dropped in value quite a lot. And they had moved that original guy who Walt sold it to moved the whole operation to California. And he actually fired me. That guy and I did not get along at all. So when he sold it and the other company, when the other family bought it, they weren't really interested in it. And so they didn't really have any plan on how to deal with it. And so eventually they asked Walt what he should do. And then that's when my name got brought back up. And so since it was in California, I didn't want to live in California. And my wife certainly didn't want to live in California. So the agreement we came to was I would move to California if I was allowed to become a minority share owner. And so they allowed that. Well, so the value of Burger at that point was extraordinarily low. So I benefited from those circumstances because then, 10, 12, 15 years later, we went from doing $500,000 a year, $500,000, not bullets, $500,000 a year to $15 million in about 10 years. And wow. So things were going great, from that perspective. And all I did, so I was the person. So when I came back, there was only 5 people in the company. It was a division that was only a part of another part of the company. And so I was key in the sense that I was the person who was there. But the thing that I did was I applied what Walt taught me. So when it changed hands, things just went to crap. They just started doing things that were dumb. I don't even need to get into them. They were just dumb. And so when I came back, I just fixed them. I just fixed them to how they were supposed to be, and we started making good bullets again. And then the thing that I did was I just told everybody who would listen to me that, hey, yeah, they were bad, and I know why, and we fixed them. So try them again. And I was just giving bullets out to anybody who would. It's because I had one. I'll tell you, Eric, because I know you appreciate this. There was a point when I came back. I was at the Super Shoot, and I had just come back, and I actually hadn't really gotten involved in the manufacturing part yet. So I was supposed to work with Walt as a sales guy. I was supposed to work out of Phoenix. That was the plan. So I go to the Super Shoot, and a good friend of mine, I won't say his name because I don't want to embarrass him, but a good friend of mine saw me, and we were talking, and we were having a great time. And because I was back, I'm a very proud guy. I'm a very eager guy. And so I say, hey, buddy, let me get you my burger hat. I'm back. Here's a burger hat. And he took it. Well, it just so happened that I saw him walk away, and I saw him do one of these little, toss it in the trash. And this was a friend of mine. And so it shook me to my core, because what it made me understand was that that's where Burger's reputation was in that moment. And so, so I poured myself into reapplying everything that Walt had taught me and making sure that we were making bullets the right way. And then that's when everything sort of came. So I just wanted to get it back, right? And so then everything did really well. Well, then we're doing really well, and the family that bought it from the guy had two brothers that ran it, and one brother was fantastic. He was the guy that I worked with. He's what I would call collaborative authority. But then he passed. He got cancer, got colon cancer. Well, he had a brother, and his brother was much harder to work with, to the extent that, and there were some other things, but basically what happened was things just got really, really toxic. And I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do. That's when NAMO sort of showed up and said, hey, we're interested in an American bullet company. Now, I learned later, I didn't know at the time, they had actually already, when you think about these things, you're like, oh, that must be the first people they came to, right? Or whatever. Well, as it turns out, they went to everybody else. They went to all the other bullet companies. They tried everybody else. And then after failing in all those other attempts, they ended up at Burger like, hey, because I guess, I don't know why, maybe they didn't think we'd sell or whatever the case might be. I don't know. But it actually ended up being timing, because had they reached out to us a few years prior, the answer would have been immediately no. But because of the timing and because of everything that was going on, I saw an opportunity. It's like, oh, wow, Lapua, Vitavuri, NAMO, all these great things. So I thought, great, I'm able to extract myself from one toxic situation, one negative situation, and get into one that's, if I had to write a script and say, who would I want to collaborate with to be successful into the future when it came to bullets? I mean, other than Lapua, which one? Because Lapua was really the only other outfit in a large scale that cared about precision. A large scale. There's a lot of small outfits. There's a ton of small outfits that do. But
passion for precision is their slogan.
Yeah, oh yeah. But the big guys, Lapua was really the only one that cared intensely about precision, or at least thought they did, or tried to, I think is a fair way to say it. So it seemed like a great opportunity. Well, the very short version is it turned out it was, I'm a great collaborator. I'm not great at fighting with people over stuff that I think is important, because I get frustrated and it doesn't make sense to me. I'm like, this is just dumb. This is stupid. This is doing something that produces a negative result. We should not do it. This is dumb. And when you're working with somebody that's collaborative, even if they disagree, you figure it out. But when you're working with somebody that's like, no, we're the boss, we're not going to do that. Well, then it's like, all right, well, I can ram my head into a wall anywhere, and it's not about the money. So anyway, I'm blathering. Um, so it became clear that that trajectory was not going to go where I thought it would. Matter of fact, it became abundantly clear that they were going to do things to it that I wasn't excited about. And so then it was like, oh my gosh, this is going to go horribly wrong. Well, what do I do? Well, so I made, I don't know if I'd call it a classic blunder, but I made the mistake of thinking because I had money, I'd be happy. And so I had enough money, I could stop working, go on with my life. And so I did. And Eric, to say that it was a dark time is to describe it lightly. It was horrible. And so I won't bore everybody with all that, but it was a really difficult time for me. It got to the point where I had to desperately seek out help and find some light, find some path through all this stuff. And I did that, and I started getting healthier, and it got my head to the point where I'm like, all right, you have to do something. It doesn't matter what it is, but you need to do something. And so I was in that frame of mind, and I went onto Facebook, and I opened up Facebook, and not many people know this, but there was a period of time where I was on Facebook, and I was putting out a ton of jokes and a ton of funny memes and all that kind of stuff. Those who know me know that was a cry for help. I was in big trouble at that point. So, but I was getting onto Facebook. So I was getting onto Facebook, and the very first thing that I saw was an ad that Macmillan had put out for a customer service. And so, so planets start aligning. I know Kelly, Macmillan is precision, and I know them. They're like true precision. They're like bench rest level precision in terms of their mindset. Right. And so it's like, wow, like, you know what? Fine. Give me a phone, give me a chair, give me something to do every day because this isn't working. And so I came in, talked to Kelly, and he's like, yeah, you sure? Go ahead. And so I started doing customer service. Well, I think guys like us are similar in the sense that, it doesn't matter where you put us. We're going to start trying to make things better. We're going to start trying to figure stuff out. We're going to start trying to improve. And so I got in there, and I'm doing the job, and I just can't help but listen. I can't help but take it in. I can't help but understand, and of course I'm on customer service. So I'm talking to the customers. So the customers are telling me frustrations with the website. They're telling me frustrations with lead times. They're telling me, so I'm hearing what the customers are saying. Well, instead of being a dutiful customer service person and just giving the appropriate timed response and moving on to the next thing, I'm like, well, how do we fix this? How do we address this? How do we get engaged in this? So I started talking to Kelly and asking some questions and, what about this and what about that? And so within a pretty short period of time, within a few months or 6 months or so, I don't remember, Kelly had said, well, hey, why don't you be GM and let's work on Macmillan. Let's do what we can to work on Macmillan. And so that's how I got back. That's how I got into Macmillan at all. Now, it just so happens that Bob Beck and Kelly were also friends. And I work with Bob at Burger. He had a wonderful hunting show that we sold so many bullets through Bob's hunting show. I mean, Bob was a fantastic promoter of Burger. He got it. He understood what long ogives mean. He understood how to set up chambers. So he's not a bench rest shooter, but he understands precision. He understands premium performance. He's a huge outdoor guy, loves long range hunting, very passionate. So he was one of those guys, Kyle and Bob and Kelly and I, and we would, all hang around and do silly things together. So, Bob was one of those friends who you interact with on those occasional times. Well, I don't remember how it came out, but I connected with him again and said, hey, I'm at Macmillan. And he's like, wow, because he had actually been talking to Kelly for a while about Bob eventually buying Macmillan at, a point when it made sense. And so then it just, how things sort of happen, it sort of makes sense. Bob's excited about that opportunity. Kelly's at a point in his career where he's, looking over the horizon at what's next in his life and, where all that's going to go. He wants Macmillan to be in capable hands. Nothing is worse than seeing what you've built, just get destroyed. So he was excited that I was there. So it just a lot of stuff made sense. And so that's what ultimately happened is Kelly made the decision to sell it to Bob. And it was pretty early on when Kelly and Bob started talking conclusively. Now they had always been talking seriously, but when they started talking like, okay, here are the specific points and let's wrap this up. That was when Bob and I started talking about Bob's vision of sort of a grander situation. So the notion of being a supplier of components to builders, and to rifle builders. And that the big dream was to be the premium supplier of rifle components, the action, the barrels, the actions, the stocks. The action stocks and barrels is pretty much where we're focused. Triggers and scopes are complicated things. Maybe if the timeline takes us there, fine. But we were really primarily interested in stocks, actions, and barrels. And so that conversation took place pretty early once the McMillan thing started to come together. And so, boy, it's a long answer to your question. I apologize. I have a tendency to do that.
Oh, I love it, man. I love it.
Well, I joined McMillan for personal reasons, and then it sort of turned into this bigger thing that we're working on now.
So you're with McMillan,
mm-hmm.
and then obviously you guys are doing great things over there. McMillan stocks, everybody knows McMillan stocks. I mean, they're great stuff. Where does Defiance enter the equation?
So we're at McMillan. Excuse me, and we're at McMillan, and we're chucking along. Now we were aware that we wanted to get into an action brand, but frankly, our expectation was that we would have an opportunity at one, maybe the smaller volume brands. And so we were working on McMillan. We were sort of getting our ducks together. And actually, one of the top people at Defiance visited the shop, and they said it was because they wanted to talk about strengthening the relationship between Defiance and McMillan. I guess, which is a truth, I guess. But really, when they came in, what they were looking for was an investor because they needed more money. And so we're like, oh my God, Defiance. Now, let me preface that. So at McMillan, the number one inlet that's requested above all is the Browning X-Bolt. And part of that is because we make stocks for the Browning X-Bolt. And so that's the number one. And we sell a ton of stocks, aftermarket stocks for the Browning X-Bolt. The number two brand of action that we inlet for is Defiance. And so when Defiance said they were coming to strengthen relationships with McMillan, we're like, cool. Yeah, let's do all of that. And but then when they show up and they say, well, we are looking for investors. Well, now the way my brain works, immediately I see a bunch of opportunities appear in front of us. Like, oh my gosh, there's a equity opportunity at Defiance. We might actually be able to make Defiance part of this collective group. I mean, we were out of our minds excited because it's just so impossible, the notion that could be the combination that we would put together. And so, we talked to the guy, and I called Bob, and like, Bob, you'll never guess who just walked in our door. And so he's over the moon excited. So we're thrilled. We get, so of course, as these things go, you sign the NDAs, you say, all right, let's exchange notes, or give us your financials and your information. And what we found was interesting. The short version is Defiance was funded heavily by venture capital opportunities, and it allowed Defiance to do some great, amazing things in terms of building their capacities and their capabilities and all that kind of stuff. The challenging part of that is it wasn't run very well as a business. It was more run as like a passion project. And so as long as you could keep feeding it money, it was fine. But the reason why that guy was in McMillan's offices that day was because the money had run out, and the performance as a cash generating entity, the performance was zero. So it was a weird opportunity, but we were able to see some opportunity in the numbers that if we could continue on with the level of activity and just figure out how to do things more efficiently, then we'd be fine. We saw where we could make things happen. And so now there's an aspect of this that, well, I'll just say it and then people can judge me for it however they want to. As you can imagine, somebody looking for investors, the situation looked a particular way. It looked pretty positive, right? It looked bright. There was a light at the end of the tunnel. There was a future that was going to make sense. But the person involved in the actual management of the company didn't want to sell. And so when we actually started the discussion with the person who actually had the decision or had the ability to sell the company, it turned into a very involved process, procedural kind of stuff, requirements, certain time things had to be experienced. You had to wait, there were delays and stuff, and all these things were required as part of the legal process to deal with these multiple owners that had different portions of the operation. Well, so that took about a year. Well, it was at the end of that year that everything was concluded, but then there was a period during that time when we were outside the process, because the process, there was a period where they had to give the disputing parties an opportunity to find an alternative. And so there was a period of time where we couldn't talk to anybody, couldn't see anything, couldn't do anything. Because if they found this other opportunity, then we were, all right, hey, thanks guys for playing, but we're going somewhere else. Well, so fast forward to the end, turns out they don't come up with this other opportunity. And so we're still on the, in the warm-up circle to get up to the plate. Well, all that stuff happens, but then when we go back to look at the situation, now we're allowed to look at the situation again. Over that period of time, my gosh, to say my opinion, my personal opinion, is that it was somebody who didn't want to let the company go, doing as much as they could to prevent that from happening. And I appreciate that and I respect that. But it did a number on the company. It was a personal choice that really did a number on the company. And so our enthusiasm level had never changed, because the idea of McMillan and Defiance being a two brands that were part of the same group and had the same vision was just too exciting to even not think about. So that part we wanted to have happen. So it's like, all right, well, the situation is very different now. Can we survive this? And well, I mean, yes, we were going to figure out a way to survive it. That was the answer. The problem was the how. And so the good news is we were able to secure the company. We were able to now we have authority over it and we can affect it. We did go through some turmoil, and that story comes up every once in a while. I made a poor decision on how we were going to survive that issue. And it definitely hurt a lot of our customers. And so we've been actively working to unravel that. And by
what was that decision? That was my.
Well, we decided to. So the situation was that the company was basically going to close. There wasn't enough money in the account to do the next payroll, which was in 2 days. That's what we were looking at. I mean, it was literally we're going to have to shut the doors kind of situation. And so because it was a choice between staying open or closing, we made some pretty radical choices. Now, the choice that wasn't very radical was the change of price of the actions. And now it just so happens to be true that Defiance had only one price change during its entire 10-year span up to that point. And that price change occurred like 9 months prior. So over the 10 years, there was only one price change the entire time. So the notion that it would need a price change was obvious. The problem that I faced was I hadn't spent enough time with the business to understand its cost structure. So I didn't have an opportunity to figure out where we could improve things. And so we were going to have to go on the numbers that they had at the time. Well, so we take the numbers that they have at the time, we come up with the cost structure, that the price change that we want to implement. We implement that price change, but the problem is the company's out of cash. We're not going to be able to make payroll. So I'm a logic guy. I'm a rationale guy. So the logic that came to my mind is, well, we need to change these prices to the actions that are shipping out the door today. And so that's the critical error that I made. And so the prices were changed immediately. And so that gave people a problem rather than an option. And so then that's where Defiance went through some turmoil in terms of its brand reputation because of that retro sort of price thing. And so, and that it pissed a lot of people off. I took the phone calls, and our customer service team, I have to credit them. They did a fantastic job of weathering the storm and helping people. Because I'll say this, I thought people would understand. I literally thought, it's like, hey guys, it's Defiance. You want me to close Defiance? I mean, come on, we got to keep it open. So this is what we got to do to keep this open. And I thought,
so the logic was, and I'm going to make light of the situation. The logic was, we have a money problem. Let's give our customers a money problem. They'll understand.
Well, that's not what was going through my head at the time, but that's what happened.
Understand. Yeah. That's why I laughed when you said, I figured they understand, because I'm like, well, I see how they wouldn't understand.
Well, it's almost like that. This might be a horrible analogy, but it just came to my mind. It's almost like that understanding that someone who stands on a corner asking for money has. It's like, you understand I'm desperate, right? You understand I need money, right? And it's like, wait a minute, you could go get a job. You have other choices. But and maybe that's a bad analogy, but my point was, because we were in a situation where I felt that if we didn't do this, then we had to close. I rationalized in my brain that, if we just explained it to him, but the way you put it, that was the truth. And I didn't recognize that in the moment. And it ultimately led to a lot of people being super pissed off. And I totally understand, having lived it, having seen the other side of it, I totally get it. And that's why once the reaction came that's why I knew I knew I had to solve it. And so that's why we started reaching out to those folks that were affected. And we're saying, like, look, we know what this cost you. We want to make this right. Because it's not just money, right? Because there's the dollars, but now every customer that they had to go to talk to, you know what I mean? It's more than just dollars.
So let's slow it down a bit, because people may not be understanding it, and I want to make sure, because I heard about it, right? We all heard about it in the industry. I want to make sure that the viewers understand what happened. The actions going out the door, as you put it, those were actions that had already been pre-ordered by your customers at a certain price, at your old price. Mm-hmm. For simplicity, let's just say $1,000 an action. Yeah. Right? They ordered it. They sold their rifles to their customers, assuming they're going to pay $1,000 an action, and then you're like, it's ready to go. Here it is. It's $1,200. Right. That was the issue.
Yes. That was the real issue. The price change, if we'd have done it where we said, like you just described, if we just said, on your next order, on the next one you get, the price change is going to be different because of all these reasons, then they have choices, right? Now they can make decisions. But what we did was, the action, you already have a guy buying the gun, probably, which is probably why you ordered the action. So you've already given them a price. You know what I mean? So it penetrates far deeper than just the person receiving the individual action. So so that's what really got everybody upset. And I'll admit that we were so excited about being a part of Defiance, and the situation was so dire that the rationale, and it was so dire, and it was we didn't have a lot of time to consider it. And so in the moment, I could rationalize that this would make sense to everybody that we did this. And it turns out I was wrong, and that's happened before, happen again. But the thing that I do know about being wrong, because that's happened before, and I'll own it, is the fact that I learned from that. And I will work to make it right. Now we've made it right with many different folks, and which includes not the very heartfelt "I'm sorry" letter, which includes arrangements where after so many actions they get another one for free or whatever. So we've paid them back in actual dollars, and we've made different things happen that were more PR related. Like, hey, what can we do to mend a fence with your customer? Oh, well, hey, if you can send them one of these, yep, we did it. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff. So anything we could have done, our mind was wide open. Anything that we could have done to help people not be pissed at us, I mean, was really what it boiled down to over that specific situation. We did actively. And so now that's one of the reasons why now it's funny to talk about it now. I mean, I'm happy to talk about it. It's what happened. But that was 2 years ago. And so now we're on the backside of all that, so the orders are back up. The folks that we deal with are very happy to deal with us. There's a few burnt bridges, and we do our best to reconnect with those folks, but there's a few burnt bridges. But the vast majority of everybody we worked with before is back with us again, and they're happy, and they understand what we're trying to do. One of the big things that they were watching very closely is it going to change? Defiance has a particular level of quality. Glenn was a bench rest guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
I'm aware.
Was a bench rest guy.
I was about to go there with Glenn, because you seem to always end up with guys that have been bench rest guys.
Right. So that people were worried. Glenn, he actually had to back off on some of his design concepts because the actions were too tight. The clearances were such that things were, you get a little grit in them and they become more difficult to operate. So yeah, Glenn was an intense bench rest guy. And so people were worried, would Defiance slip? Would the quality slide? And fortunately, I have there's no flexibility when it comes to things like that in my perspective. It has to be the same or better. Always. If it's not this, whatever we do, so since then we've realized, because as you can imagine, a company that was run as a passion project and not a company had a lot of opportunities to modify some of their procedures and practices that saved process time and saved waste, but it didn't change the quality. And in some cases, we were actually able to make things a little bit better. And so now the prices are actually pretty similar to what they were when we started, but that's because we were able to implement some cost saving measures. And actually they were fairly simple things that they just didn't bother to do. And so now we're back where the costing is more manageable. And so the prices now are very competitive. They're not super crazy high. That's another reason why we're out here talking, is because there are narratives out there that seem to linger about how Defiance is so overpriced. Well, if you look today, if you compare them, we're right there with all the other premium actions, and so
what did the prices jump from to?
Well, yeah, so that's another misconception that some people have is, there was some reporting out, or some discussion out there that the prices jumped by $500. For an action, that's a lot. So if it's $1,000 action, jumps $500, that's a huge jump.
I've heard they doubled.
Yeah, that's what I say as any. Yeah,
that's why I want to bring this up, because it's like let's get down to it. Like what did it go from, and what did it go to? Because there's a lot of rumors.
Oh yeah, well, Defiance has a product line, right? It's got 7 different models, and those models come in all kinds of. Matter of fact, to say they have 7 models is sort of a puzzling thing to say, but anyway. They have these certain models. Well, the Ruckus and the Deviant are the models with more options, more features, more going on with them. So those are the more expensive models. And then there was a model called the Tenacity. Well, the Tenacity was originally designed to be a no choices action. It was the simplest form that they could make. So it was the lowest cost product. Well, and so it was the lowest price product. Well, that particular product, I think it was retailing for $900 and something. And so if you were a gun builder, you could get that action for around $700. Well, that specific action. So what we did when we looked at all the costing is we found out that the costing of that action was actually far closer to the other actions because, and this is this is something that I love about Defiance, but it can also be frustrating. They can do so much. They can do so many different things that when people would call up, and that was one of Glenn's selling points on the Defiance brand, was that total customization, total flexibility. We can do all these things you want done. And so what would happen was the builders who wanted the $700 action, yeah, but they want it with this shroud, or they want it with this port, and they want it with this, this difference and this difference. Well, a passion project being what it is, the answer was always yes, 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 yes. So the tenacity turned into a ruckus. It became a deviant. It became a ruckus in terms of cost. And so what we did is we made the cost consistent with, we made the prices consistent with the cost. So the price change that occurred for the ruckus and the deviant was small. It was less than $100. I mean, it was a very small amount. But that's not what everybody focused on, because the tenacity, which was available retail for maybe $900 or something like that, it ended up going to a retail price of like $13.75, because it's basically a ruckus. It is. After all the features and all the things you do to it, that's what the cost was. And so it ended up being a situation where that's the one. So when it doubled or $500 or 50% or whatever, it's that specific action that everybody's talking about, because all the other prices didn't change that much. Very small, less than 8%. This one, though, as you can imagine, being a premium operation that makes quality actions, that sells one of them at $700, the tenacity was 50% of the back order. Yeah. And so that's why that notion of Defiance, so that became Defiance. All Defiance prices blew up to that one. All were up $500. All of them were up double. Everybody focused on that one because of what happened. So that's where all those rumors came from. And so I can't even say that they're wrong, because that specific action, it did go up a lot. At 50%, closer to 35, 40, it went up a lot. I mean, it went up a lot because of what was going on. Well, so that's what happened in terms of where the price was. So instead of me blathering on, I think that's the answer to your question.
So 2 years, we're 2 years since that happened about, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Knowing, you kind of know what happened. You knew that the reaction that people had. Knowing what you know now, if you had to go back and do it again, would you do it the exact same way, or would you do it different?
Oh, I'd absolutely do it differently.
How would you do it?
Well, we would not make it retro. So there's a particular business philosophy that you don't feed a burning building, right? And so if Defiance was on the verge of collapse, pouring a bunch more money into it only made that situation worse. And so we could have gotten into we could have covered the deficit and managed to keep the company afloat while we implemented these things over time. That would have certainly minimized the anger, the visceral, the comments where, because let's say we did that exact same thing where the prices were changed in the exact same way, except we did it and it was a choice. So the very first one you ordered already, you're going to get it at that price, but the next one you get, it's going to be a lot more, but that's your choice to either buy it or not buy it down the line. I think the rumor mill might have been less energetic. You know what I mean? Even if that would have happened. Now, another thing that, I don't have a multiverse twisty thing like Captain Marvel, or like Doctor Strange, but having had the time to understand the operation, we would have come to see that there were a number of improvement opportunities, cost improvement opportunities. And so by the time that price would have taken effect for most people, we would have figured out, let's get rid of all this waste so we can make the cost more reasonable. So then the price change actually wouldn't have had to have happened at all, because they were priced pretty competitively before, a little towards the higher end before. So right now they're at that same price. So had we been able to take the time to address the cost issues and implement a waste reduction, what we've already done, in a period of time where we would have sold that first marked up action, we would have realized, well, actually, so let me be totally open, because that's sort of how I do things. The Classic is still worth more than we charge for it. Now the Tenacity was discontinued because we didn't want to have to fight the battle of explaining to people that we were bringing it back to its original form of being a simple no choices action. And so we discontinued it and created the Classic, which is basically the Tenacity with no choices. And so now we have an action that is a no choices action that's as efficiently made as we can do. So it does present a cost savings that allows for it to be sold more, but it's still priced lower than it's actually worth. But that's because we've learned, it's not like bullets. We've learned that if you're not out there with a lower priced option, then you become a different kind of company. And one of the things, different, I mean by size. So one of the things that's true about Defiance is it's very large in terms of number of machines. We've only got like 28, 30 people, but they bought a lot of machines. We got a ton of machines. So we've got a ton of capacity. So to cover all that stuff, we have to be at a certain volume to make all this stuff work. Well, if you don't have that low price point volume, then you're just doing premium stuff. And if you're doing just premium stuff, you're not doing nearly as much in volume as if you include that. So we continue to make that action because the volume allows everything else to work. But even at the price it's at now, it's still undervalued. I mean, underpriced for its value. And that's something that'll correct itself out over time. We're working on a few other ways that we can do things more efficiently to save on cost, so that we can keep that there. But it's just one of those realities that I learned in action manufacturing that's part of the business that I wasn't aware of. So that's what we'd have done differently.
Yeah.
But we're actually doing it now. We just have the unfortunate reality of having had that part of the timeline, having that be part of the timeline. So we're still doing the waste reduction. We're still doing the analysis. All of those things would have happened anyway. I mean, that's how I don't know how to run a business other than to try to improve it.
So what is your role at Defiance?
Well, so I'm my title is COO. I'm not really a title guy, but that's my title. Basically, I'm responsible for the health and longevity of both brands. And so I'm the guy. I have a lot of experience in business management, business operations, logistics, all that kind of stuff, financials. I have a lot of experience in that kind of thing. So the contribution that I bring to Defiance and to Macmillan is not technical know-how, it's business know-how. It's business acumen. It's how we price things, and I think that frankly, the thing that I'm most excited about, those are all true. The thing that I'm most excited about bringing to both brands and anything that I do is I want to do all the things that are right for the business, but I do it from a perspective of passion. Because there are some people that are very good at business that look only at numbers. They call them bean counters and number crunchers. And, when somebody like that gets control of a company, what you end up with is an extraordinarily stable company, but it's a boring company. It doesn't really innovate. It doesn't really try to expand because they need things to be stable because that's how they control it and that's how they keep things where they want them to be. Well, I come with a multiple decades of knowledge of business management, but I bring this passion. And so when I'm in the room and everybody's excited about something, I'm figuring out how we can do it as a business situation, but I'm still figuring it out. I'm not poo-pooing it because it's not all numbers. I'm like, all right, how do we make this work? But I'm looking at it from how do we make this work from a realistic way? There's going to be costs we got to cover. There's R&D costs, whatever, there's all the various things that happen, but I still have the passion for it. So I want it to be successful, but I'm the one that has to figure out the practical way to do it. That's one of the things I very much enjoy about Bob is he is a big thinker. He's a big idea guy. And so he comes up with these ideas that are wonderful and very exciting. And then I'm the one that needs to take that idea and, okay, how do we make that idea real? And that's sort of my job. Now, the actual day-to-day, we have the huge fortune of having Varian Zingaro be the general manager of McMillan. He's been with Millen for a very long time. He was the guy who developed a lot of the stocks while Kelly was here. He's a key part of McMillan's operation. He's the general manager. He's what we call the decider in our organization, because he's the decider for the McMillan group. And on then you got Chad Triola, the general manager for Defiance. He's the decider of the Defiance stuff. So they've got technical people. I'll tell you one funny thing. So see, I'm this new guy. I come in and so this is not during the conversations we're having about, skies falling and pricing and cash and all this kind of stuff. But we're talking about, what can we do, fun stuff and all this kind of stuff. And they're explaining to me now. I'm not really understanding how I'm not connecting the dots. But what they're explaining to me is basically the whole thing was basically a big yes operation. They're so capable at doing so many different things with machining that if somebody asked for something, if you could put it on an action, the answer was yes. And even to the extent that they were connected. Somebody reached out to them and said, "Oh, we've got all these pre-fit barrels, but they're pre-fits for another brand. Is there anything you can do to help us?" They're like, yeah. So they changed the receiver to have the different threads, and they set up the different bolt. And so they actually made Defiance actions that fit pre-fits for another brand. And so that's how flexible they are. And that's kind of stuff that I don't understand. I'm not now as a machinist and, knowing what all that stuff would be second nature to you, but I'm a bullet guy. And admittedly, Berger, all of its tooling work was done by outside organizations. And so I wasn't ever in charge of a tool room or anything like that. I was near one in the sense that there was a company in the same building we were in, and they had a precision tool shop. And so I was exposed to some of their challenges, but I never actually ran it. And to me, a machine shop, a tool shop, or an action manufacturing operation is not the same as a production line operation. Now in Defiance, it's a little similar because they're more like lines, but they act more like a machine shop because they're so customizable that there's a lot of interruption. Whereas normal manufacturing processes, you want to make it so that it's just constantly spinning, constantly going. Whereas Defiance does a lot of starting and stopping because it does so much that's customized. And so I'm trying to implement cost savings techniques from a, manufacturing in a line perspective, but I'm working in an operation that can be that, but their culture is so strongly like job shop, machine shop, everything's an individual thing that I don't want to blow that up and ruin it by impressing my understanding of it. So I leave the technical stuff to them. So another long answer. My role is to make sure that the companies don't fall off a cliff, so that we're making decisions that are healthy from a financial perspective. And I'm the one that looks at all that stuff. And then there are technical people in the companies that focus on making the great products. And then, we all talk about it. I'm certainly interested in it. I'm familiar with it, but I'd never walk into a meeting going, all right, we're going to make this type of bolt or whatever, because I don't even know what the hell I'm talking about.
Yeah, so. I understand. And, that's kind of, a lot of that hits home with me, with the machine shop that I have now, and it is definitely a passion project for me. But I've been a businessman for a long time. So it's really hard for me to balance the two. Right. But, yeah, it's definitely fun when it's just a passion project. But, once you start bringing in employees, you kind of got to make sure you can pay them, because they're really happy, they're excited until you don't pay them. And then they're not as passionate. Then I find out that they're not as passionate as I am. Yeah. But it's great fun, man. Especially when you're surrounded by like-minded people like I am, and shoot small groups, man. That's such an addiction. And I mean, you've lived it. You've been there, done that. Got the T-shirt.
Yeah, well, and and the thing, I remember going into F class because I remember being excited about something that was still precision oriented, but it wasn't as encumbering as bench rest. The first time I went to a match and didn't have to bring my reloading equipment, that was so nice. That was so nice.
It is so nuts how much gear those bench rest guys bring.
There were, through the years, I've seen a lot when it comes to bench rest, and it's remarkable how, there were guys that had their trucks. They'd have their trucks and they'd have a shell, and then they'd open them up. Their inside was all set up. They basically had an entire reloading room in the bed of their truck, and they had these crazy drawers that would pull out. Then I've seen the guys that had the trailers that they pull that are reloading rooms in the trailers, little small trailers like hold an ATV or something like that. They're so passionate about shooting zeros that
now they have these big full-blown RVs.
Oh yeah. Well, bench rest is due for a revision. There's it's dwindling in its enthusiasm and in its numbers. I think the people who like it still like it, but its numbers are dwindling. And I wonder if it has to do with getting a little philosophical here, but it seems that there's a group in society that doesn't seem to want to work as hard as others. It just seems that way. Bench rest is work. It's work. And it's only rewarding if you love working at it. That's where it's rewarding, because Tony's getting all the trophies. I don't think he shoots anymore, but the guys that are winning are very hard to beat. If you want to do it, you do it because you want to shoot little groups and you just want to push yourself as far as you can. The people coming up, the pool of people who would be the next bench rest shooting community, I think it's too much for them. I think it's just too much work. And for what you get, the people who started bench rest shooting were varmint hunters that wanted to improve their skills and improve their performance. Those were people that it was during a period of time, this was the 40s and the 50s and the 60s as this became a thing. Those were hardy people. Those were people that worked at everything they did. They worked at washing their clothes. They worked at, going to the store. They worked at everything they did. So the idea of being in a competition that takes work is, okay, that's just Tuesday. That's just another day. Well, now you fast forward to now, the competition to shoot in a bench rest competition requires a level of commitment that people today don't have in anything. You don't have to work that hard to do anything. You don't have to work that hard to go to school. You can go to school online. All your entertainment goes to your phone. You don't have to do anything. And commerce is such that all this technology has given all these companies these abilities to make everybody's lives easier. And Amazon's making, shipments. I can order something and they bring it to me in the next hour. All this stuff is so simple. I think it's conditioned a whole population of people to not get all that excited about all the work that it takes to do some of these things. And so I wonder what's going to happen I don't think being passionate about something at that level is changing. I don't think that's something that you can diminish. I don't think I was trained to be this passionate. I think it's just, I was, when the egg was fertilized, I was this passionate, right? So I don't think that passion is gone. I just think people are applying that passion to things that don't take as much work, or just maybe get more exposure. I don't know. But I'm nervous that bench rest, people are still going to be passionate for precision. That even in PRS, they want precision. Now they don't understand it at the same level that we do, but they want it. They sense it. It's like the Force. They know it's out there. They just don't know how to wield it. Yeah, well, yeah.
Precision rifle series. They just don't see it like we see it.
No, they don't. It's funny. It's funny hearing them talk, but they don't see it.
Yeah. So I had a discussion with Jaden Quinlan from Hornady, and I said, we were discussing quarter MOE rifles and such, and he says they don't really exist, and I'm like, of course they do. I see them all the time, and I said, I think that the whole problem comes because you guys aren't precision shooters, and he goes, yeah, we are. He goes, I shoot PRS. I'm like, you don't understand. Anyway, so that sparked the whole thing about me not understanding because it's in the name. But anyway, but yeah, it's listen, if you're passionate about anything, PRS, F-class, bench rest, just blinking with your buddies, shooting steel, shooting rocks, whatever, get out there. It is such a therapeutic sport, shooting. I have a friend that I kind of helped him get going, and he was struggling trying to hit targets at long range, and I took him out 500 yards. He hit a 2-inch target at 500 yards. Every chance he gets, 3-4 times a week, he sends me, he built the target and he's out there shooting. And I saw him yesterday and I said, hey Ray, have you ordered a barrel yet? And he just laughed. He goes, what do you mean? I'm like, you don't realize this, but as much as you shoot, that barrel's going to be gone in no time. And now you're going to have this massive gap of waiting for barrels. And he didn't even think about that.
His performance is going to change and you won't know why.
Exactly. I said, you're going to quit hitting that target, because he's like, man, I'm getting much better. I said, you will until the rifle goes away. And then I said, you're not, and he's not aware that this is going to happen.
Right.
But anyway, it's such an interesting cycle, right? Because then the next barrel might be better or worse than what you have now. And then two things will happen. If it's worse, you just order another barrel, right? But if it's better, people don't realize that some of the worst things that can happen to you is to have a really good barrel, because then you get used to that barrel.
Yeah.
And then it'll be years before you find another one.
And that's, if you don't shoot in true precision, there are people that might not see it at that level. I had a barrel that did that to me once, and man, it was like I couldn't make mistakes. I just loved it, and I did sort of make the mistake of letting it go a little bit to my head, like, oh, I'm doing this. This is me. Because then when that went away and I got my other barrel back, it's like, damn it.
Yeah, it'll ruin a lot of shooters.
Yeah, it was a bummer.
But it makes you look like a superhero.
Oh yeah.
But in F class, it is a well-known thing in F class. Somebody just all of a sudden starts beating everybody. The common thing to say is like, I can't wait for the barrel to be gone.
Right.
Once that barrel's gone, he's going to be back to normal.
Yep.
Speaking of matches, you talked about the super shoot, how the numbers are dwindling. Mm-hmm. You started a match, or at least you had a big hand in starting a match in F class.
Yes.
That was, to this day, one of the premier matches. And that is the
Southwest Nationals. Yeah, Southwest Nationals.
That's the controversy, the name.
Yeah,
What was it called?
It was always called the Southwest Nationals. We did that on purpose. A lot of people referred to it as the burger match, but we called it the Southwest Nationals for a reason. So it came about after I had.
Well, a lot of people called it, or they thought, I myself included, that it was called the Burger Southwest Nationals.
Well,
was it the Burger Southwest Nationals?
Yeah. So yes.
So that's a controversy.
Yeah.
Was it ever called the Burger Southwest Nationals?
Well, there were probably marketing materials out there somewhere that said Burger Southwest Nationals, but how we addressed it internally and what we thought of it as was the Southwest Nationals, basically powered by Burger. Now. So to be fair, part of my job is balancing business and passion. And so when we were talking about doing the Southwest Nationals, our reasons were we were motivated by the experiences that I had at Camp Perry. So we wanted to create something that rivaled Camp Perry. Because remember, Southwest Nationals is both high power and F class, or at least it was. It was at one point high power and F. Okay. So when I went to the owners and told them about what we wanted to spend a bunch of money on for this match, they they made it clear that it had to promote the brand. We couldn't just do it for the sake of the passion only. And so that's where the burger thing came in. And so there were directives to make sure that burger was highlighted, because that was the reason why we were spending all this money to do this match. I mean, we spent a lot of money on that match. And so now we did it because I wanted to show the folks at Camp Perry how to run a match. That's why we did it. And I mean, we wanted to do it for the shooters, but we were motivated by the fact that I wish they were doing it better somewhere else. And so we're going to do it in a way that we think could be good. And so that's why we called it the Southwest Nationals, is because we were saying, hey, this is what the Nationals should be like. It shouldn't be like they are at Camp Perry. They should be like they are here. And because at that point, the F-Class was, growing and becoming new, but the F-Class Nationals wasn't even really part of that discussion in terms of why we called it the Nationals. It wasn't about F-Class. So the fact that burger had to be included was just part of us getting the funding. And so now when it was out there,
started the match. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we did. Yeah, we did for sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, it was a collaboration. I'm huge on collaborations. It was the Desert Sharpshooters. So Michelle Gallagher, Mid Tompkins, they are the Desert Sharpshooters. So they're the ones that actually operate the event, the shooting part of the event, the scorekeeping, all the match, the range master, all the target pulling, all that stuff. Burger came in with what I call shooter enhancements. So now we partnered together to make it the match that we all ran. But it was actually, now that I think about it, it was the Burger South, now that you say that freshens my memory. It was the Burger Southwest Nationals powered by the Desert Sharpshooters, because the Desert Sharpshooters was the outfit that actually ran the match part. Because they did that. That's what they did all the time. They did that. They had many matches out there every year. But Burger brought the enhancements, but now we work together. So instead of it being, we don't get involved in any of the match operation stuff and you don't get involved in any of the enhancement stuff, we work together. We're like, hey, what can we do in both places that make both things better? And that's where that everything that happened in that match was a discussion between the two parties.
When was that match started? When was the first? Do you remember?
Gosh, no.
I was hoping you did, because I missed only the first one, and then I've attended every single one of them ever since. And, but that I don't remember when.
Gosh, it has to be after 2004.
It was like 2008, 9.
Yeah. 2009. I don't know why 2009 sort of jumps out. I don't remember the exact year, but I know it did a while ago. It's been. I
remember because I won it. Now I don't know what year I won it.
Didn't you beat me? I thought did you beat me?
I'm sure I beat you.
I know you beat me a lot. I came in second once.
That wasn't me.
I think it was. Yeah,
I won the Southwest Nationals. Oh my goodness, it had to be 2023.
Okay. Nice.
And I think when somebody asked me, I think I told them it took me 14 years to win it. So I think that's when I kind of figured out when it started. So it had to be 2008, 2009, somewhere around there.
Sounds about right.
But yeah, I'm like, yeah. They're like, man, you did great. I'm like, yeah, it only took me 14 years to win it.
Yeah, but that's now, Eric. You. I hope people, folks in PRS. I think PRS is a good. I think the shooting that they do in PRS is good, but PRS doesn't really understand itself in many ways. It shouldn't be called precision rifle shooting. It should be called accurate rifle shooting. And one of the things that I think is interesting about the PRS is
my suggestion is practical, so they don't have to change.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. Keep the P, right? Is so much of the results are dependent on things they don't even see or control. The wind change at some distance. There's no indications. There's nothing. There's nothing that you can do to hone in on what we know to be precision. They're just hitting something that's a certain size, and you hit it anywhere, and you're fine, and you get the whole point. Well, those guys, the guys that win that, they're accomplished shooters. I don't want to take anything away from them at all. But the guys that win that, they effectively won the high-end lottery, basically. They essentially just were the luckiest with the wind not blowing them off the target, in a sense. Now, it takes a certain group of people to be among that group that ends up winning. There's no question about it. But to get there, there's some luck involved. In F class, there's too many indicators. There's huge wind flags on the range. Much more stuff is known because you don't have to worry about distancing and ranging and all that kind of stuff. Even though how they do it is they might as well just tell them where. I think they do now. I think they actually do tell them what the distance is, so they don't even need to measure anymore. The guys that you're shooting up against, the gear race that goes on. I know there's a gear race in precision shooting or PRS, but they're not on the same level. They're not looking at it as a bench rest shooter would, who is actually looking at precision, because I think the thing that they don't understand, the difference, to me, the stark difference is the scoring system. If you can hit it anywhere and it's the same value, that's accuracy. If you have to hit it in a specific spot to get the most out of that, it's accurate in the sense that it's the same spot, but you need precision to do it. You need to have precision to be able to get that accurate, to be able to hit a half minute X ring or a full minute 10 ring.
Well, bench rest for group is strictly precision.
Yeah, that's totally.
You don't even have to hit the center.
Right.
They don't even care. I just want to measure how small that thing is. Now, based on the discussions that I've had, the guys at the top, they're actually precision oriented, and I think that's why they're winning.
Okay.
Because they're betting their rifles. They're I don't know if they're sorting, but I've been asked, should I turn my necks? Should I, like, they're
getting
trust
there.
Me, they're getting there because they understand, if I break the shot on the edge, I want to hit the edge,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a wobble zone, it's I tell them it's like, you guys are doing everything you can to not make it a precision sport, because you're making me shoot off this wobbly barricade, or making me shoot left-handed, whatever. But the guys that are winning, they're actually very impressive,
Good.
in the sense of they shoot and they read the wind, but they're so honed in that everything else is already automatic. And they're actually watching the wind, but the main thing they watch is where the bullet actually hits the plate. They can read the plate, how the plate wobbles, and they, if they shoot and they hit and the plate goes like that, they know they're on the edge. Next shot they move over, they're chasing the spotter, what we would call an F class. So they're actually doing a lot of. It's not lottery. It's very accurate. It's very accurate.
They're working
What's
at it.
the word here?
Well, they're working at it. Yeah, well, and
yeah,
which is reasonable.
They're very accurate.
Yeah.
They're precise, and they're trying to be precise. I think the guys already figured out that if you're gonna win, you need to be precise. Being accurate is not good enough,
Right.
And
well, but I think and you know what? I agree with what you're saying, and I might be overstating it by saying it's the lottery. My point is, when I look at these matches, a similar thing that I see is typically shots are done over ravines, or dips, because the target's usually on the face of another slope or hill or something. So the wind indication is either right up close or right at the target. So there's this whole distance that they can't really see anything other than mirage. Well, you and I both know mirage isn't at where the bullet is. Mirage is where the scope is. And so the wind that is actually affecting the bullet, they can't see. And so now I accept that, there are hunters that can look at trees and, look around and sort of get a sense of what's going on. But having shot short range bench rest, long range bench rest, and F class, I mean, how many F class ranges have you been where you've seen two flags, going in opposite directions?
All of them.
Yeah, right. Or you see or everything by you is just completely dropped, but out at 700 yards, there's, two or three, they're just going like, crazy. And those are wind indicators that are 40 feet off the ground. So they're right where the bullet's at. So I guess my point is, it's because the target sizes are what they are, and because the point values are the same no matter where you hit the target. To me, that's an accuracy game. Now, anybody that brings precision to that accuracy game is going to do better. And if these guys are, just like all of us, if they're competitive and passionate, and if they want to seek improving at an accuracy game, the only way you can improve it is through precision, because that's what you need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I call it shrinking the size of the basketball. So my analogy is, the target is the basket, and your group size is the size of the basketball that you get to use to make the baskets, right? So if you have a 10-inch target and a 10-inch ball, it's going to be very hard to make baskets. But if you have a 10-inch target with a 4-inch ball, it's going to be super easy to make these baskets, right? So that's my analogy, because it is absolutely got to shrink that basketball. If you shrink that basketball, your chances of making that basket are much easier. But I think every sport that, I just had a discussion with Ken Wheeler, who is the owner of the PRS, and we discussed this very topic. As it continues, and I'm not so sure they can shrink the size of the targets anymore, because that'll hurt the newer shooters, right? But I think the top shooter is going to start cleaning all the targets more often, simply because they're going to be focused more on precision and keeping them, centered. And of course, if you can shrink the size of the basketball, which includes wind reading, reloading techniques, it's going to be, those guys are just going to be that much more hard. They're going to be harder to beat.
No question.
And they're the top guys are, oh my goodness, they're actually truly impressive as to how the targets that they hit in the positions that they can do it at, and at the speed at which they can do it. They're extremely fast, and I think that they can be fast because they have a smaller basketball now.
Well, and they, I would offer that I agree with everything you've said. You're absolutely true. You're absolutely right. I think another element of PRS is the top shooters are athletes. They are, because now there are a few shooters that you could probably characterize as not as a healthy diet, not as eating a healthy diet, but I would challenge anybody to have a arm wrestling match with that guy. There are people who don't look athletic who are very athletic. Those who are competing at the highest levels of PRS and doing well have a similar look, have a similar age. It's a physical game as much as it is an accuracy. Now I say accuracy because that's really what it is. They're hitting a standard target with a single point value. Now they will improve, no question. They will improve through practices that address precision. But PRS is it's an interesting thing. I've been watching it quite a lot, and I think they're in a little bit of trouble because they're going down the same road that several other competitions have gone down. But we'll see where that goes.
The sign that I've noticed that they're really starting to care about precision is some of these PRS shooters are actually going F-class matches.
Oh, that's huge.
To really see how precise the rifles are, and they're finding out, oh crap, these are actually flyers, and I'm not getting smoked by the wind, because in PRS when they miss the shot, they go, I got the wind got me. Well, they don't know it was a flyer, it was the wind, right? Well, when they go to an F-class match and every shot is on paper and it's accounted for, they realize, oh, my rifle just doesn't shoot as good as I thought it did. And they're actually going to F-class matches, refining their reloading procedures, refining their loads, and now they can have a rifle that shoots extremely well. Now they go back to PRS, and now they find out they're doing much better because they're more precise. So it's they're cross training is a really good thing, and I think for any PRS guy, they need to go to an F-class match and really find out how good the rifle shoots. And once they make it shoot better, I think their scores are going to go up. But just like anything else, passion for precision.
Well, and I think that's brilliant. F-class would do a lot for PRS shooters. No question. It'll tell them so much. I think that's smart. That's very smart.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir. Well, Eric, thank you so much. I know
welcome.
we can probably talk for 8 hours,
Sure.
especially because we haven't talked in about quite a few years.
Yeah.
But I like what you did with Burger, and now you're McMillan and Defiance, and I know I know you're trying your best to do there what you did with Burger.
Absolutely.
And hope best wishes to you and your team.
Thank you.
And,
Well, we got a lot of cool things going on. We're making a lot of strides in both brands, and so we just encourage people to check us out for the first time again, because I think you'll find that things that you hear about McMillan, things that you hear about Defiance, most of it comes from misinformation, and so I would encourage you to take a look. Anybody who's watching, take a look. McMillan and Defiance are doing great things, but we are of this same cloth. The reason I'm on your podcast, Eric, is because we are of this same cloth. We are a precision-oriented operation, and we make things that are at the highest premium level in terms of quality and repeatability for a precision-oriented focus. And so check us out. And Eric, it's always great to talk to you. I'd talk to you again anytime. And thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
all right, man. Take care.
You too.
Thank you.
Take it easy.